on both the intramural and extramural side, these are not going to be easy times to bring young folks along. But I think it actually makes mentoring all the more important. In fact, I'm pretty sure about that. So what are the lessons learned from your all's experience in terms of mentoring? It's obviously getting bright, bold people, but then what do you do? All three, anyway, you first? Sure. You brought it up.
I brought it up. Well, I think it's, I've been really fortunate enough that I've had the opportunity to have excellent mentors. And I think you have to fulfill a series of elements. One is helping them in their training, but at the same time giving them the capacity to confront difficult economical times, etc. But mostly it's this network. We're not doing science alone. We're parts of groups, and we're part of interacting scientists. So when they set up their new laboratory, they know as me as a mentor, they can come back to me, and that's how it's worked all along, even for myself. So it's having very talented people, but giving them the good feet for them to start on, and then to continue this mentorship that I think there's never a time to end mentorship, not only for yourself, but for your trainees, to help them and aid them so that they are successful in their next stage of their career path.
I think that one of the key things about mentoring is it really is lifelong. And I think that, I get a call or two from a student almost every day, and those students range from age 6 to 60 in terms of, they're all facets of life. And also, I think it's important, it's also important to remember that mentoring just isn't in the area of science. It's, success is not just how you're doing in science, it's about how you're doing in all facets of your life. And so you have to really be prepared to really, get into what's going on with that individual. There's actually a lot of contrast that takes place. I think that mentoring of young people who are students, I think at least my philosophy has been to, maybe it's just from my influence of Bob Langer, is to let them be a little freer when they are starting out and doing their research. Let them take a number of different avenues. They may have a couple blind alleys that they may actually go through in the very beginning to help them in terms of getting on track, making sure you're there at every step of the way if they need help, but making sure that they know that they have some freedom to move forward. And so it's really there's a real contrast that takes place in terms of the sort of the young student, allowing them to move forward and fairly freely and maybe not giving as much advice on a day-to-day basis, and then as they mature, really making sure that you're open to give any advice, do it in a broad variety of areas on different topics.
I think just to add to that, I think having myself benefit from quite a bit of great mentoring, and I think what I try to do for my students is that I think main thing that you set an example for them, and also that I think what you teach them is to give back to the system. So I have, my graduate students, my postdocs will mentor the graduate students will mentor undergraduates, and undergraduates will mentor high school students. So everybody get a flavor in what's like to mentor or stand on the other side, of the table. So I think that's something that you train them, and also that hopefully they take away from them wisdom as they after they leave you. Yeah, but again, it is a lifelong process, and I think it's a very enjoyable relationship. And I think I feel my students have mentored me to be a better advisor. So you learn from them, and then they learn from you as well.
I wonder if I could just build on the mentoring idea and bring up the point I was talking about only very briefly this morning, and see what Cato and particularly Emily and others in the audience might think about our role as members of advocacy groups in terms of not so much mentoring, but in order to be a good mentor, you have to have someone to be to be instructed. You have to recruit folks. And speaking from the neuromuscular standpoint, but I'm pretty certain I'm speaking for all of us in the audience, we really would like to have young people like some of these folks you've seen earlier today showing up saying, I'm very interested in research. I'm interested in Marfan syndrome. I'm interested in helping people I knew in my family or some of my relatives. You're a special group here. You have an opportunity to recruit people. We're desperate to get people in muscle disease. I'll bet you Emily could have some thoughts about how she wants to get people interested. I'm just picking up on Cato saying, well, you know, I have some students that are 5 up to 60. Well, you know, I think that's a good sign. So my question is to the panel, what would you advise us to do? I mean, you've got an old timer like me, but I'm talking about some of these young people in the audience who are interested in this whole spectrum of challenging diseases that you've addressed.
Emily, I think it's yours.
Right. Well, the first thing I would really recommend is if you want people to be interested in the muscular diseases, you have to talk about them. Like Amy said, she never really talked about her arthritis, and you know, regardless of cultural norms, if you want people to be interested, they have to know about it. And so for me, the biggest thing was always advocating for myself, since arthritis, especially with my generation, is an invisible disease. In order for people to know about it, they have to know you well enough that you're comfortable to talk to them. And as I've proven, I really don't have to know anyone to talk to them about my arthritis, because I talk to all of you. But you have to be willing to open your mouth and just say, like, I have this disease. This is what I do for it. This is what I need to be done for it. And that's how you really garner interest.
At least here in NIH, which is my experience in the intramural research program here at NIMS, you have students that are really interested in coming, and maybe as Ellen alluded, once they're there, I think it's just a role of giving the example and the passion that you have for the science. They will feed on that. Not only it's mutual, because young people are just very energetic and very passionate. So if you can feed out of that and at the same time let them feed out of your passion of why you're doing this, what is the importance in the context of the big field, why? It's not understanding just how this molecule works, but if they get the big picture, this is what you're doing now, but look, this result of this experiment is invaluable, but in the next year, look where we would be going, look what the potential of this goes. And this passion is contagious, and I think it's mutual. So, and they are the generation of the future. So you want to have people that are passionate and good to replace you and later.
Yeah, I also think there's some real opportunities that we have with very, very young people. And obviously I'm very, very concerned about America in science, because we are absolutely falling so far behind, and we don't know how far behind we really are in terms of the generations of students that are not pursuing science and who are lost, and other countries that are really embracing science so much. And we, you know, and so if we don't turn that around fairly quickly, we will be lost in terms of science. So, but I'm also impressed about how students can be influenced in terms of science. My daughter, there was Take Your Daughter to School Day, and I was on the National Science Foundation Advisory Board for Engineering. So I brought my daughter to the advisory board meeting, and they gave her a little placard, and she was sitting around the table and pontificating. And at the very end, she asked me, they said, what do you want to do? She said, I want to be an engineer. I'm going to be an engineer. And still to this day, if you ask her 5 years later, what are you going to do? She says, I'm going to be an engineer, just from that one experience. And so I think that if we want to really look at musculoskeletal diseases and look at ways to be able to harness the energy, we should think about harnessing it early. Every grade school or high school should have a couple posters sponsored by NIAMS about the areas. Have a speaker series, talk to middle school students, and you will find, 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, you'll find people going to college saying, I'm studying this disease because I got interested in a very, very early age, or someone came with that disease and talked to me close up and talked to me about how it affected their lives, and I said, I'm going to work on this area. So I think there's some real opportunities for us to be able to make that happen.
Hi, Kathy Green from Northwestern University. One of the things that came up a few times, and I think Helen alluded to this quite a bit, is the importance of building interdisciplinary teams and learning how to work with different kinds of individuals. And I think there are a lot of institutions have institutes and are building programs, interdisciplinary programs. But I'm just wondering from this panel, what kinds of models do you think work best to build these teams and to get people speaking the same language? How are we going to be able, this is clearly going to continue into the future. It's going to be a very important part of our institutions and also at NIH. What's the best way to do this? And I think we need to start young. So training programs, institutes, how do we do this best?
I mean, I think that's it's a very complex process, the multidisciplinary team, and I think, as you know, NIH has quite a few initiatives, the multi-PI system, etc. I think it's actually a tremendous plus to the application process. So people can get, everybody gets credit. I think that's the first thing. I think that's really, really important. And from a student perspective, and especially for the work that I do in tissue engineering and biomaterial design, you have to have a clinical collaborator. And I think that's the approach that we've had. Because I think at the end of the day, we're not designing just for intellectual exercise, we're designing for translation. So how do you, I think having the surgeons involved from the get-go is actually critical, because you can design a scaffold system, they cannot implement it. They cannot use it in surgery, and it's sort of useless. So you have to go back to the drawing board again. So I think from the clinical collaborator for the work that we do, it's extremely critical. And then, so you get them involved early on, and you have to be accommodating of their schedules, because it's a different model system. And then I think from the biological aspect, I alluded to the fact of some of the work we did in co-culture and triculture, understanding cellular interactions. I'm not a biologist, and I don't have the expertise to do all of that, but it's a critical component we have to understand in order to do the work that we do. So you approach them, and you convince them, and you get them on board and get that going. So that's really more on a investigator skill, but I think there beginning to be institutional and national recognition of the importance of building those interdisciplinary teams that would allow you to actually bring a big idea to fruition.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we try to do is fix this. One of the things that we try to do at the University of Connecticut is create a collaborator tenure track. In other words, where 70 to 80% of the publications, you can be a middle author and demonstrate your ability to catalyze and move teams forward. And you have to do, that helps, that's a track toward tenure. Which that's something that encourages individuals to work in teams. Too much, as you know, for tenure, many of the times you have to either be the first author or last author. If you're not, paper isn't worth that much in terms of that tenure track. But by creating a track, it's a collaborative track that says 70 to 80% of your papers can be a middle author, and you can demonstrate how you've been able to make teams work. That's a pathway to tenure. That's something that encourages team building and team cooperation.
I would like to add to that of course that is an ideal model, but seeing it from the perspective of a basic research, you really do need at some point the collaborative effort of the clinicians to be able to do the translational part. So how it works out, it's very different depending on the field. Sometimes you just have to set it on the get-go to be able to get the grant, to be able to move forward the idea. Sometimes it is basic research that is guided by basic questions that lead you to an answer, and that they are going to interface. And ultimately our goal, no matter if we're clinicians or basic, is to see the usefulness of this data and results that we're obtaining. But again, as somebody I think alluded at this morning as an alternate universe, the way I see it is I see it as parallel universes. You have to have both, and in some time they have to or collide or interact by whatever, shooting stars, that they communicate. And if it's forming teams in whatever the discipline it is, it's the only way that it's going to end up being effective.
Last question.
Going back to tissue engineering, a question to Dr. Helen Lu. So how close are we coming to make the ligament or tendon that might be closer to human use? Because this is one of the most challenging areas, because most of these tissues are being developed under high tension. In fact, you probably cannot simulate some of it also in an easier way, because you need the right growth factor, right cells, and the extracellular matrix to work in sequential way to probably make something that might be clinically relevant and useful. So where are we with respect to the strength in terms of modulus of elasticity of these materials you are making?
That's a great question about how well are we in terms of integrating different type of tissue. So in the lab we work on 3 systems. One is the ligament to bone interface, which I showed. Another one is the tendon to bone in the rotator cuff repair, the supraspinatus tendon, and the final one is the osteochondral interface. So the first 2 have already been in 2 animal models. They're going into large animal model systems. And both systems actually have worked remarkably well. So especially in our recent data for the rotator cuff is that you can actually regenerate the insertion site. So actually you can functionally integrate the soft tissue to bone. And in terms of mechanical properties, the mechanical properties of the different phases actually matches that of the native tissue are within range of. And we built in safety factors, about 3, because these are degradable systems. So once it's in a aqueous environment, in a water-containing environment, it degrades. So it loses about 60% of its mechanical properties in some aspects. So the safety factors built in, and as the system degrades, it's replaced with living tissues. And so at the end of the day, that we expect it to go away probably within 6 months to a year.
So in terms of strength, how close are they to a real natural tendon or ligament in terms of tear strength, in terms of other mechanical properties?
What we've learned from for total joint replacement, that you cannot have something that's too strong, and you cannot have something that's too weak. So you have to match within range of the mechanical properties of native tissue, because you're in a dynamic system. So if it's too strong, the tissue will resorb, especially in bone. If it's too weak, it just would not function. So our system is designed to match almost exactly to the mechanical property of the model we're trying to replace. If you're doing rat model, you have to match to the rat ligament or tendon. If you're doing human, you match to the human. But what's nice about the versatility of the design is that you can engineer that mechanical property pretty readily.
Yeah. Thank you.
So that's hopeful that we'll move from the animal models beyond that pretty soon. All right. Well, thank you to all the panel. I think you'll have seen that this is sort of a mixed message.